My name is Alicia Thompson, and I am an OBGYN. When I was growing up, we really didn't have any sort of lived faith in my home at all. I would say we were an agnostic family. My parents were boomers, and they had faith growing up. My mother specifically was in a home that was deeply faithful, but they both left the faith and never really brought it into our lives. I was christened as a child, but I think it was more to placate my grandmother, who passed away just about a year after I was born. I did, as a child, have those basic questions of life and meaning of life and death. Once I became a young adult, I never really considered it much until I went to residency, which is where we are trained as physicians to do our job in the day in and day out. So I had finished medical school and moved to Ohio, and I had a huge crisis, a spiritual crisis, a personal crisis, and also it coincided with a moral crisis that I was experiencing in my job surrounding abortion. And it was in asking these deep questions about my own dignity and meaning of life and the dignity and meaning of life of human beings that I was encountering in the womb that I, again, started to revisit those questions that I considered as a child, which is, what is the meaning of life, and what is my role as a physician and as a human being to uphold that dignity, and does everyone have it equally? And it was in those questions that I started attending church, and those naturally kind of are answered in a church experience. I first started to think about the Catholic Church because of basic ease of faith fitting into my life and my schedule. So while I had been attending this church where I had first been called to Jesus and to become a Christian, I went through a period of my life where I couldn't be available for the house church based on my work schedule. And it was 3 months solid. I could not be with this community. And I felt very alone. And I wasn't alone anymore that I felt sad and didn't want to do anything. I had a huge hunger to find out about Jesus and to pursue him. Around that time, found out that the church I'd been going to was actually Baptist, and I had no idea. It was not the Baptist type of church that I had been exposed to or had been familiar with in the panhandle of Florida. It was a very casual church. I was very surprised by that. And so I started wondering, well, what does that even mean? What does Baptist mean? What does Methodist mean, or Evangelical or Lutheran or any of the other innumerable denominations? And I wanted to know the answer to that question. So I started asking the people around me that I knew were churchgoers, or at least said that they were Christian, and what kind of Christian they were and what that meant. And I didn't get almost any feedback at all. Nobody was much interested in having that conversation with me in my immediate perimeter of work and life. And one day I had been given a book from a doctor who I had operated with like a week or two prior. And I was talking about church and what that means and all the different denominations while she was there. And she didn't have much to add either. But then a couple of weeks later, she saw me in the operating room again, and she had a book in her purse that she had brought for me. And it was the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And she said, was not a very good sell. She gave me the book and she said, I'm a lapsed Catholic, so I really don't need this anymore, but maybe it could help you because this is basically what Catholics believe and why we believe it. So I said, okay, great. And I took the book immediately, and I had been wrestling so much with the issue of abortion and why I wouldn't do this in my career. And I just knew that I couldn't do it in my conscience. It was a deep place within me that I knew that even if nobody had known about it, I just could not compel myself to participate in abortion. And it was hard for me to reconcile that. And I didn't know why, but I knew the answer was no, I couldn't do it. And it was my conscience. So when she handed me the catechism, I opened up the back to the index and I looked up the word conscience, and I found the paragraph in the catechism that describes what a conscience is within a person. And it described it as a place where man is alone with God in his inmost thoughts, and God inscribes himself into our hearts, and essentially that echoes in our depths. And I knew that that was true, that it resonated with me in a way that I couldn't describe, but I knew in that moment, that's it. This Catholic book here for me is it. And it was loaded with footnotes and references and scripture passages that explained the teachings of the Catholic Church. And Around that time, I started looking into Catholic churches again. I had attended some Catholic churches back in medical school, but it was a peripheral type of relationship. I dated a guy in medical school, and his parents were Catholic, Polish Catholic immigrants, both of them. And they faithfully attended Mass every single weekend. And they lived a beautiful, simple life of faith and family and extended family and their Polish community. And they nurtured me just by being who they were. And I love them profoundly. And that positive association I had with the Catholic Church encouraged me to just have a foray back into it when I was thinking about Catholicism. And I felt very comfortable in the church once I went in because it was familiar and I had that initial trust within that community. And as I went down the rabbit hole of Catholicism and I read more about the sacraments and I started looking into RCIA, I just had excellent teachers and people that mentored me along the way and answered my questions. One of whom I married, my husband Greg, was my student at the time, and he realized very early on that I was looking into RCIA programs. And when I found out that he was a Catholic, I didn't know any personally and didn't have any friends that were Catholic. So I peppered him with questions and I harassed him at work, and he wanted to impress me. So he read up on it and we developed a strong friendship and then a relationship built around the faith. And I ultimately came into the Catholic Church on April 11th, 2009.